It was a routine flight. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777-200ER, took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. On the evening of March 8, 2014, the flight was heading to Beijing. 227 passengers, mostly from China, along with 12 crew members, were on board. The mood was calm routine, as expected. As the plane ascended into the night sky, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid spoke with air traffic control, their voices calm, measured. For an hour, everything seemed normal. But just before 1:20 a.m., things started to go wrong. Air traffic control in Malaysia tried to make contact. No response. The last thing they heard was the captain's voice saying, "Good night, Malaysian 370. A routine farewell, then silence. It wasn't unusual for a plane to momentarily lose contact, especially over remote areas, but it was. Something was off. Flight 370 had not disappeared from radar entirely at this point. At first, the plane's transponder, the device that communicates the aircraft's position to ground radar, stopped transmitting. Air traffic controllers could see the aircraft's blip on radar, but there was no way to directly communicate with it. This is when they made the first realization: the plane had changed its course. The flight path, which should have been a straight line to Beijing, had inexplicably deviated westward toward the Andaman Sea. This is when the real mystery began. At 2:15 a.m., the last primary radar signal was received. The plane was off course by a wide margin. The ground radar that had tracked it for hours suddenly lost the plane's signal completely. By then, the Boeing 777 was beyond the range of most radar systems, and any contact was gone. It was now officially a missing aircraft. But even in this terrifying void of information, a glimmer of hope remained: a satellite system known as Inmarsat. This system could communicate with the plane through a handshake signal, a periodic ping sent to the satellite confirming the aircraft's continued flight. The pings were automatic, silent. They didn't send any data about the plane's location, but they did show the plane was still in the air. For hours after the disappearance, the satellite pings kept coming. Inmarsat's engineers confirmed that at 8:19 a.m., the plane was still airborne, somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean. By now, aviation experts, government officials, and families of the passengers were scrambling for answers. Search operations commenced, covering thousands of square miles, hoping to find anything that could explain where the plane had gone. But the search was like looking for a needle in a haystack. No wreckage was found, despite the efforts. Weeks passed. The world held its breath as news outlets filled with speculation. Was the plane hijacked? Was it terrorism? Or was something far more sinister at play? What happened to the passengers on that flight? Were they awake when the plane veered off course? What was going through their minds? Were there signs of a struggle in the cabin? Could someone have intentionally taken control of the aircraft? In the weeks that followed, the world began to speculate wildly. Authorities were tight-lipped, only confirming what they could. But no one could deny that this wasn't just an aviation accident, it was something else entirely. As the days passed, more theories emerged, each darker than the last. Was there a catastrophic mechanical failure? Was there something wrong with the plane's systems? Or had a crew member, perhaps even one of the pilots, deliberately taken the aircraft off course? Despite mounting pressure, no answers came. As the search continued, so did the emotional strain. The families of the passengers were in turmoil, grasping at any shred of hope. Could their loved ones be alive? Was there any chance the plane had simply lost its way and was somewhere out there, stranded on a remote island? The reality was slowly setting in. No one knew where the plane was or what had happened to it. For 13 years, the families of Flight 370's passengers have lived with this uncertainty. Every new lead, every new discovery seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The world had to move on. But the question of why this happened never left the hearts of those who had loved ones on board. On March 8, 2014, Flight 370 vanished from radar. It was a modern-day enigma. A plane, a full load of passengers, and a crew suddenly gone. No one had any answers, only more questions. Was it a simple accident, or was there something much darker at play? For 13 years, the world has speculated, theorized, and obsessed over what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The families of the 239 souls aboard have never had closure. They've had to live with the weight of an absence, a shadow that haunts them every day. There was no wreckage for months. No Mayday call? The story that unfolded didn't just challenge our understanding of aviation, it shook the world to its core. How does a plane in this age of technology disappear without a trace? Was it sabotage? Was there a deeper, hidden cause behind the flight's disappearance? Join us as we unravel the chilling truth that has been buried for 13 years. What really happened to Flight 370? In the meantime, aviation authorities and experts dove deeper into the investigation. But the deeper they looked, the more they uncovered, the more chilling the possibility became. Could this have been intentional? Was Flight 370 not a tragic accident but something far darker, planned with an eerie precision? The first reports and preliminary investigations left authorities grasping at straws. But over time, they uncovered something chilling, an unprecedented turn of events that seemed almost impossible. What if this wasn't an accident at all? What if this was a calculated move? As the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 expanded, so did the conspiracy theories. Experts and investigators were working around the clock, using every tool at their disposal, but each new lead seemed to go nowhere. Despite the most advanced satellite systems, radar technology, and a massive search effort, the plane remained as elusive as a ghost. One of the most unsettling findings came when debris from the plane began to wash up on beaches thousands of miles from the flight's last known position. In July 2015, a piece of the plane's wing, a flaperon, was found on the shores of Reunion Island, an overseas French territory in the Indian Ocean. It was the first confirmed piece of wreckage to be linked to Flight 370, yet it raised more questions than answers. How could a piece of the plane have traveled so far? Had it been floating in the water for over a year? This discovery brought the investigation back into focus, but it only intensified the mystery. Experts noted the area where the flaperon was found was far from the original search area, which had been focused on the southern Indian Ocean. This wasn't just a small deviation in the flight path. It was a vast distance, one that suggested the plane had been deliberately maneuvered, taking it far from its intended route. The discovery of additional debris in the following months painted an even darker picture. Fragments of the plane, like small pieces of the fuselage, were found on beaches across the Indian Ocean. It was a bitter confirmation. Flight 370 had crashed into the sea. But what had happened in the moments leading up to that crash? At the heart of this puzzle was the Inmarsat satellite data. The pings, which had been sent automatically from the plane every hour, were crucial to narrowing down the flight's final location. Based on this data, investigators had pinpointed a remote stretch of the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from the plane's last known position. The death zone, as it was referred to, was a vast area of water with no land in sight, a place where the plane's wreckage was likely to be spread across an unimaginable expanse. It wasn't just the route of the plane that was mysterious, but the fact that no one had heard a single distress signal. No Mayday. No emergency transmission. Nothing. If something had gone horribly wrong, if there had been a mechanical failure or a fire, why was there no attempt to communicate with ground control? That silence was deafening, and it led to even darker questions. Was someone on board preventing the crew from communicating? As investigators combed through the personal backgrounds of the passengers and crew, new theories began to emerge. Could one of the pilots have intentionally flown the plane into the ocean? The idea was as unsettling as it was disturbing, but the more the investigation delved into the lives of Captain Zahari and First Officer Farik, the more troubling questions arose. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had been an experienced pilot with over 18,000 flight hours under his belt. His reputation in the aviation community was solid, but his personal life, uncovered during the investigation, revealed cracks. Zahari had been going through a difficult time. His marriage was in trouble, and there were reports that he had been struggling with emotional issues in the months leading up to the flight. A few weeks before the disappearance, he had even created a flight simulator at home, where authorities later discovered a route strikingly similar to the path the plane had taken during its final moments. This discovery sent chills down the spine of the investigators. Had Captain Zahari, in a moment of despair, deliberately taken control of the flight and flown it off course? Did he, in some twisted act, intend to make the plane disappear, taking 239 innocent lives with him? This theory, while chilling, was one that many had considered, but without concrete evidence, it remained speculative at best. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, on the other hand, had a much less tumultuous background, but his role in the disappearance was no less murky. In the aftermath of the incident, reports revealed that he had been on his phone during the flight, a violation of standard operating procedures. However, this didn't necessarily point to foul play. His involvement, or lack thereof, in the plane's disappearance remained unclear. Was he simply unaware of the unfolding events, or had he been powerless to stop them? But the most chilling revelation came when investigators discovered a trail of strange activity on the plane's flight systems. The aircraft's flight management system had been manually reset shortly after the plane's course was altered. This action could only have been done by someone on the flight deck, and it strongly suggested that the course change was intentional. The question lingered: was this the work of a disturbed mind, a lone act of madness, or was there something more sinister at play? The deeper investigators dug into the personal lives of the crew, the more unnerving the possibilities became. Was there a connection to terrorism? Could the disappearance have been a coordinated attack? Or was it an isolated, inexplicable act of violence? As weeks turned into months and months into years, the search for answers grew more and more desperate. Theories ranging from hijacking to government cover-ups circulated. Theories about a hidden, secret agenda, about rogue elements taking control of the aircraft, even about a conspiracy to hide the truth had taken root. The families of the passengers were left in a state of limbo with no clear answers. Each new lead, each new piece of debris seemed to only deepen the mystery. The world had been captivated by the story of Flight 370, and its disappearance had become a haunting symbol of our inability to control the uncontrollable. No one could deny that something was horribly wrong. Yet, despite the most advanced technology and the tireless work of investigators, the truth remained just out of reach. As the years passed, the emotional toll on the families of the passengers mounted. For them, the pain wasn't just in the loss, it was in the endless cycle of uncertainty, the lack of closure. They were left with a question that could never be answered: what really happened to Flight 370? In the face of all the theories and discoveries, there was only one truth that seemed certain: the flight, the passengers, and the plane were gone. But the mystery of why it had all happened, the real reason behind the disappearance, still remained unsolved, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to finally uncover it. 13 years have passed since Flight 370 disappeared, but for the families of the passengers the wounds remain open. They've lived through the endless search efforts, the fragmented theories, and the overwhelming uncertainty. No one could have prepared them for this, an agonizing blend of hope and despair, of false starts and dead ends. What followed the plane's disappearance wasn't just an investigation. It was a global spectacle that captured the attention of millions. Yet after all these years, the question remains: what happened to Flight 370? The initial search for the wreckage was one of the largest and most expensive in aviation history. Experts pored over satellite data, pored over maps of the ocean, and dispatched a fleet of ships and planes to scour the Indian Ocean. For months, search crews scoured thousands of square miles, covering an area roughly the size of the United States. But the longer the search went on, the more elusive the plane seemed to be. No one had seen anything like this before. In 2015, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, launched an unprecedented search operation focusing on a remote patch of ocean known as the Southern Arc. This area was identified based on the satellite pings that were automatically sent by the plane. These pings, which had continued for hours after the plane went off radar, were critical in narrowing down the search area. Yet, despite this technological breakthrough, no wreckage was found in the immediate vicinity. The search was called off in 2017, and it seemed like the world had all but given up on uncovering the truth. But for the families of those on board, there was no closure, no answers. The pain of losing a loved one in such a mysterious way never subsided. Then, in 2018, a breakthrough of sorts. Another piece of wreckage was found, this time on the shores of Mozambique. It was a small fragment of the plane's wing. This discovery revived the investigation and raised hope that there were still answers to be found. However, as with the flaperon found in Reunion, this was only a small piece of the puzzle. And again, it raised more questions than answers. How had the wreckage traveled such a great distance? Had the plane been intentionally flown off course, or had it spiraled out of control in the final moments? Theories about what happened to Flight 370 continued to evolve. As more pieces of wreckage washed up, a chilling idea began to take shape. Some speculated that the plane had been deliberately flown into the ocean, with the crew taking the plane's fate into their own hands. Others believed that there had been a catastrophic mechanical failure, one so severe that it left the crew with no choice but to lose control of the aircraft. The problem with both theories, however, was that there was no clear evidence to support either one. What made the disappearance even more chilling was the lack of distress signals. In aviation, when something goes wrong, the crew is trained to send a distress signal. But in the case of Flight 370, nothing came, not a word. Not a single sign of trouble until the very end. This led to one of the most haunting possibilities. What if the plane had been intentionally flown off course, with no chance of recovery? Some have suggested that the plane's disappearance could have been the result of a deliberate act, possibly a hijacking or a planned attack. There are even theories that suggest a possible motive for this: terrorism. The passengers aboard Flight 370 were, in part, Chinese nationals, and there was speculation at the time that the flight could have been targeted due to political tensions. However, as time went on, no evidence surfaced to substantiate this theory. If it had been a terrorist act, why hadn't the perpetrators made their demands known? Why hadn't there been any communication from the hijackers? It made the disappearance even more confounding. By the time the search was officially called off, the investigation had cost over $160 million and had yielded no solid conclusions. The lack of closure was heartbreaking for the families of those on board. Theories had come and gone, but the only certainty remained that Flight 370 had vanished without a trace. In the years that followed, the investigation continued in a limited capacity. A few new leads emerged, including possible sightings of debris, but nothing concrete. In 2018, the official search was formally suspended. The world had largely moved on, and yet for the families of the passengers, the absence of closure remained unbearable. Then, in 2021, a new development emerged. A group of independent investigators, using newly available satellite data, began to reconsider the search area and suggested that the wreckage might have been found in a different location. This led to a renewed push for further investigation. But again, despite the new efforts, the wreckage remains elusive. It seems as though Flight 370 was fated to disappear into the vastness of the ocean, leaving behind only unanswered questions. The aftermath of the disappearance of Flight 370 is a story of grief and unresolved mystery. The families of the passengers have had to live with the uncertainty, knowing that their loved ones were lost in the most inexplicable way. The hope for closure seems distant, and the truth, if it is ever found, is likely to be far more complex than anyone could imagine. Today, 13 years later, Flight 370 remains one of the most haunting mysteries in modern aviation history. The families who lost their loved ones still have no answers. The investigation has stalled, and the plane's final resting place is still unknown. What really happened to Flight 370? The truth remains buried in the depths of the Indian Ocean, waiting to be discovered or forever lost to the world. But as the years pass, the pain of those who lost their loved ones does not fade. The void left by the disappearance of Flight 370 is not something that can ever be filled. No wreckage, no piece of debris, no explanation will ever bring the passengers back. And for those left behind, the story of Flight 370 is one that will never be truly over.